Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pulsar's webinar, Coffee Through the Audience Filter. So this is looking at the state of coffee 2023. We've got some incredible insights for you today. We can't wait to show you, talk you through what we've got. And please do add any questions that you think of throughout at all into the Q&A box, which will be on your screen somewhere. We'll be addressing those mainly at the end or during if one pops up that's particularly brilliant. So without further ado, let's dive in. So welcome. We're joined by incredible online acceleration specialists from Taylors of Harrogate, Ollie Ratcliffe. Would you like to introduce yourself a little bit, Ollie? Tell us just a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, can do. Yeah. So I'm Ollie. So I am online acceleration specialist at Taylors of Harrogate. So I work across two brands, Yorkshire Tea and Taylor's Coffee. Basically, my job is to do everything in line with sort of online growth. So primarily focusing on e-commerce. So yeah, accelerating the growth of online.
Awesome. It was really good. And I can't wait to hear all of your insights based on what we're going to be showing today. We've had some preliminary discussions that's so exciting. I'm Sal Morton. I'm content marketing lead here at Pulsar. And I'll be kind of delivering this webinar along with Di. Would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, hi, my name is Di. I'm marketing research lead at Pulsar. So yeah, I'm mainly working on research behind different marketing activities. And then, yeah, really excited about today.
Awesome, brilliant. So today we're going to be talking you through all things coffee, but just a little bit of overview first. We're from Pulsar, and if you don't know who Pulsar is, what we do, I thought I'd just give you a little bit of an overview. So all the data you're about to see is from Pulsar. Don't worry, I'm not just going to read from this slide at you. At Pulsar, we gather conversational data from all across the internet, from social sources such as Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Pinterest, Reddit, many more, as well as other sources such as Google search, online news, forums, blogs, broadcast data, even from television and the radio as well. So we're about offering the opportunity to see all the conversations that exist on the internet, and this allows brands to analyze their audience and its sub-audiences, as well as answer discrete audience-based questions. And we offer all of that on our platform. And we also have an in-house research department that works as a consultancy as well. So here are just a few of the clients that we've helped out recently. As you can see, no two use cases are the same from this vast array here. So if you're interested in hearing about some of the ways that brands utilize Pulsar, do take a look at the resource page of our website. Now, what we're covering today, we're going to be getting into all of this that you see in front of you. And let's start off by defining our coffee scenes. Now, what does that mean? Let's get into it. So here we see the rise of coffee, both on social media and the search queries as well, since January 2010. So the rise of coffee trends online over the last decade exhibits how perpetual social interest in coffee is. So given the latest uptick in 2022, driven a lot by coffee aesthetics, coffee posting and all this, which is garnering over 100,000 likes, things like this, and showing how coffee can really be translated into a form of cultural currency, as it were. So Ollie, I thought that I'd ask you just a little bit about the rise of coffee and what you've seen as well. So when we were talking, you said specifically a bit of a rise since COVID. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly that, Sal. So one of the biggest sort of trends that we've seen, if you look towards the back end of that graph, you can start to see a bit of an upwards climb from sort of when first lockdown and COVID originally happened. And one of the things that we've noticed as a coffee brand is that a lot of people went from, obviously coffee shops closed, and a lot of people went to try and sort of recreate that coffee shop experience at home. So we've actually seen sort of interest in coffee grow over sort of the period of time as people try and recreate those coffee shop experiences at home, start to experiment a little bit more and dig a little bit more into sort of coffee and the the sort of intricacies around it.
It's really interesting, and people thinking about the experience of their coffee that they can have in their home outside of the coffee shop is something that we'll get into much more later. I'm really excited to talk more through that. So to continue on and better understand the shifts in that coffee conversation, we divided the conversational data from 2010 onwards into these 5 distinct behavioral categories. So we've got socializing, which is catching up, dating, things like this. Sustainability, so things like fair trade, biodiversity, things like that. connoisseurship, which is mentions of kind of quality and barista level coffee making, as well as taste, things like that. Aesthetics, which is obviously mention of vibes, aesthetics, pretty coffee. I'm sure we've all seen some of those wonderful pour over iced coffees online. We'll be talking a bit more about those later as well. And finally, productivity, which encapsulates coffee as an energy drink, its caffeine content, for concentration and things like this. So here we can see how those have moved over time as well. And finally, here in our trend lines, we've got some of the trends that exist in the coffee conversation. So personally, I really love to see the top right here, iced coffee. So my friends know I'm an absolute fiend for iced coffee, and that line would probably map directly to my WhatsApp messages about it as well. I think we can all probably gather that dip there is when the weather gets cold. So yeah, Ollie, what do you have any observations based on this? I mean, I know that obviously sustainability is something that's quite on your guys' mind over there at Taylors.
Yeah, I think again, we're investing quite heavily in sustainability. We always have done, and we continue to do so. I think what I find sort of particularly interesting about the sustainability angle of coffee and that sort of chart there is obviously public interest is growing and continues to grow. I think one of the things that's quite fascinating is actually the dip at the end as well, just in the fact that that's obviously in line with Christmas. So a lot of people are sort of, the messaging and the conversation naturally changes, which is sort of what explains that. But I think it's quite interesting again to see like the big spikes, especially as we sort of look over, I don't know, the past sort of like 6 to 8 months in terms of how sustainability's become more front and center, not just in terms of like brand communications, but actually also in terms of like consumer mindset. People are becoming a lot more sustainability aware, and we're starting to see that reflect back in both the tea and the coffee conversation, actually.
It's really interesting. Also interesting to see that people's priorities do change over that kind of Christmas, December period, and New Year period. Very interesting. Thanks, Ollie. So we're going to be talking about what is motivating people to get talking about coffee. So when breaking down the coffee conversation online by drink type, unsurprisingly, espresso, latte appear as the top coffee drinks. While espresso is mainly associated with maybe the latest espresso machine boom that we'll go on to talk about later, that Ollie touched a little bit on, making coffee at home. Latte reflects the evergreen demand among coffee aficionados to have that milky coffee. We can see here on the right an association with plant-based milk topping that milk there in the latte area. I mean, Ollie, would you say that the rise in plant-based milk alongside coffee is something that is that you've noticed as well?
Yeah, we've noticed it quite a lot from like an offline sampling. So when we've been doing sampling at festivals and things like that, the interest in people sort of wanting to have a plant-based offering is definitely grown. And like I say, we've definitely noticed it more so over the past 12 months, but it is really starting to take off. I think again, when you look at where this data has come from, which is social listening data, I think it's there's a lot of conversation around it online, and again, that's continuing to grow. So yeah, I think it's interesting to see it, to see the growth of it over time, and the fact that, and actually the different choices as well, in terms of people sort of looking at oat milk versus almond milk, particularly because obviously each different one has an impact on taste.
Yeah. I think oat milk is kind of known to be well paired with coffee because it's got this kind of earthy creaminess, but then also almond is maybe associated with high water usage and maybe a non-sustainable thing as well. So it's really interesting, the nuance within alternative milks. We actually have a report on our website about alternative milks, and we went really into depth in that. So if that's something that interests you, do look into that. And Ollie, espresso being this huge one here at the top. So do you have any insights into why espresso might be so huge?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, espresso from a coffee making point of view, and I mean, there's people in our business that will know a lot more about the intricacies of coffee than I do, but it's the base of a lot of sort of the milkier coffee drinks. But so naturally, I think it's and people associate it quite heavily with like getting that kick, that caffeine kick, which is obviously a key sort of talking point around coffee itself. I think in terms of like, if we're to look at the growth and the trajectory over time, I think seeing espresso coming out on top doesn't surprise me. It's one of the things that we've seen, again, coming back to like the COVID conversation, is a lot of people investing in sort of machinery and the gear and the equipment. So people, you know, buying coffee machines, buying espresso machines, and having them at home, and ultimately sort of wanting to talk about their investment as they get more involved in sort of the coffee conversation online. So I think it's it's definitely interesting. We actually brought out a coffee blend specifically made for espresso, which you can find on your shelves at the moment, which is sort of all about, you know, tailoring the perfect coffee for espresso, tapping into that consumer mindset of, you know, this is the drink that we want to have.
Because it's typically not a very accessible at-home coffee for those of you who are big coffee fans. So getting a nice home espresso, I know, is something that people really strive for. So it's quite interesting to see it topping, despite it being a difficult thing to make well. Just to move on, because I think this is putting us into the kind of way we drink coffee conversation. So we've got a lot of information here. So pods, we can see, are being quite a large part of the conversation. So why pods? I think people obviously moving into cutting their out-of-home coffee spending, or potentially during lockdown to find their kind of fave home coffee recipes, and instant coffee as well being part of that accessibility to coffee. We've got the rise here as well of coffee bags, which we'll be talking a little bit more about. And then we've also got a regional breakdown of where those delivery methods of coffee are most prevalent. So I think obviously there's a lot here to talk about. I mean, we did see in the coffee bag conversation, Di, I think it was you that told me that people are taking Taylor's coffee bags to work with them when their office coffee isn't too great, or taking them out for emergency cases. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct, because it's really interesting to see this uptick in coffee bags, especially within UK and then Australia and then New Zealand, because they really developed this tea culture. So whenever they have this poor coffee situation, they seem to take the coffee bags as a backup plan. So we can see lots of like a good mentions around it, especially Taylor's coffee bags. So yeah, that was quite interesting to see how they behave around this new coffee bags.
I like that. I think it's really interesting to hear them as being convenient, but not necessarily ready to drink, but, you know, ready to get made. I mean, there's so many things that I'd love to ask you about on this slide, Ollie. I mean, I know that you've got some stuff to say on pods and stuff to say on bags. I mean, where'd you like to begin?
Oh, yeah, where do I start? I think there's a couple of things to sort of pull out on this data. I think it's really interesting. I mean, looking at it, so, you know, looking at the circle on the left-hand side, I think one of the biggest things that stands out to me is that, you know, sort of instant and pods taking the lion's share almost, with sort of coffee bags playing in that space. And I think one of the things that sort of strikes me in terms of like the coffee conversation is that, you know, people are wanting convenient ways to access coffee. And one of the things that we've seen with ground coffee is sometimes it can almost be a bit of a barrier. You know, people are wondering sort of like, do I need to do a full cafetiere? You know, what sort of coffee is going to be best for it? How do I dispose of my grounds? And all these sorts of different conversations. And I think, you know, when you look at things like instant and coffee bags particularly as well, and pods, it's a very quick, easy way to still get well, a convenient way to have a good coffee. I think one of the interesting things for us as well is just the rising coffee bags. I mean, we've seen we've been sort of selling coffee bags for a while now, and I think we've really seen coffee bags particularly as a product grow over the last 3 years, I think it is. It's gone strength to strength. I couldn't quote you the percentages off the top of my head, but it's sort of one of our biggest growing areas. And I think, again, that just sort of brings it back to people are wanting, really good, high quality coffee, but they're wanting to have it on the go and take it with them and have that convenience. So, yeah.
It's really interesting. It's the rise of coffee bags, and maybe we'll be able to see, obviously, making up 2% of the conversation here worldwide at the moment, seems to be making up a bigger percentage in the UK than Australia. It's yet to crack the US. And pods, I just wanted to briefly mention pods because we've dwelled on this slide a lot, and I do want to make sure that we move on. But pods is something that Taylors have actually moved away from. Is that right?
Yeah, we wanted to focus on, so like we've touched on before, we've got a lot of sustainability. We hold sustainability in everything that we do, and we just found that sort of pods in their previous format, we wanted to move to sort of more sustainable options. We're actually seeing, so we've come out of the pods market, but looking at it from a total category point of view, there is actually a lot of growth in pods at the moment. And I think that can come from a number of different areas. It can come from there's more environmental focus, and the innovation in that sort of area of the market shifting, and there's a lot of businesses that are coming out with more environmentally friendly pods. There's that convenience factor that we touched on, and I think, again, the other thing is that pods as a format offers it offers that sort of aficionado type effect where people can still enjoy sort of all the benefits, so to speak, of a really high quality coffee, but delivered in a very simple, easy to use format. So it doesn't really surprise me that pods is coming out so strong, especially when you think of some of the other branded players that are playing in there. There's some big names.
It's really interesting. That's really interesting, and I think that the only one other insight that we haven't dove into here yet is their prevalence in the US, kind of edging out ground compared to the UK, and also the kind of marginally larger there in the US ready to drink coffee. This is canned coffee, so we do see Americans kind of really focusing on that caffeine content, the famous pick me up, as it were. So let's move on from this slide, otherwise I could dwell on it for ages. I found so many things on here, so interesting. So just moving on to coffee beans and their origin, and let's have a look at Robusta versus Arabica. So for those that don't know, Robusta beans are grown at lower altitude, more disease resistant, and primarily cultivated in areas such as Vietnam, Brazil, Africa. And Arabica beans are grown at higher altitude, require quite specific climate and soil conditions, and they're mainly cultivated in Latin America, Eastern Africa, and Asia. They tend to be pricier due to their higher quality and delicate flavors. Now, I'm not a coffee aficionado in that way, so if that's wrong, either of you do let me know. that was my research. You said there's one that tastes smokier, and that means it can cut through the milk better. Is that right?
Yeah. So Robusta. So we use Robusta. Not all, like we use a bit of Robusta in our hot lava Java skew, which is sort of where the smokiness name comes from. And yeah, Robusta, it's got a slightly higher caffeine content, which is why it's sort of in the hot lava Java brand skew, because it gives it a bit of a kick in your step, so to speak. But yeah, it's used in it's used in a lot of coffees for, like I say, cutting through like milk and syrups and all these other different things that people experiment with and put in their coffee. So it's it's quite a punchy flavor is Robusta, and
awesome.
Arabica is delicious as well.
I think I would find, I'm not a coffee snob, so I find it hard to have a bad cup of coffee, to be honest. So yeah, brilliant. And then we can see on the right here the locations most associated in online conversation with coffee growth. So very interesting here, and some sample social posts as well. So the pandemic has pulled over coffee drinks from outside the home to inside the home. It's allowed people to kind of rediscover the pleasure of making their own coffee, or the frustration of making their own coffee, and experimenting with different coffee uses as well. I'm sure we saw it, everyone has seen TikTok posts about kind of coffee fads, dalgona coffee, things like this. And unsurprisingly, building up your own home coffee station becomes an obsession for indulgence, it's kind of a small indulgence to have in the home, and it's driven, not necessarily by coffee snobs and people who are historically into coffee, and not just people who are geeky about coffee, but people who are just wanting that everyday cup of coffee at this point. So you touched a little bit earlier, Ollie, on machinery and equipment in the past couple of years. Could you tell us a little bit more about this chart on the right hand side, how it maybe attaches to the one on the left?
Yeah, exactly that. I think, I mean, it comes back to my earlier point quite nicely, actually, and probably part of the reason why espresso comes out quite strongly in terms of like the top drinks formats being made. So, like I say, at the start of lockdown, we had a lot of people, or we noticed a lot of people that were investing in not just espresso machines, but sort of bean to cup machines and just general coffee machines at home. Like I say, trying to recreate that barista experience that they necessarily get from their local coffee shop in sort of an in-home environment. And sort of as a result as well, that's almost had a bit of a trickle-down effect. So as people have gone into moved away or moved into sort of at-home coffee consumption and invested in the equipment to do so, they've started or potentially started with a bean to cup machine, or even started to experiment with other cheaper, more affordable options that still that offer a higher quality coffee. So it's interesting to see things like AeroPress coming out quite strong. The sort of the filter conversation and sort of V60s and things like that all coming out, all sort of gaining traction over the past sort of 24 months versus sort of where they might have been before. So I think as a whole, like for the coffee category, it's great because it means that there's people are experimenting more with their equipment. They are coming in contact with different coffees sort of outside of what might be considered mainstream, and they're getting more into sort of like the single origin and the micro lot things, which is it is only a good thing. And I think there's a lot of different sort of coffee brands that are starting to play in that space.
It's really interesting to see as well the kind of more fringe, like you said, the AeroPress and maybe Chemex kind of coming into that conversation as well, and things like the espresso tamper as well, which is kind of very interesting equipment mentions. I'm now going to hand over to Di to present some absolutely incredible stuff on when coffee becomes a mindset. I'm sure that she's got much more to say about this. And Ollie, what I'll do is I'll kind of ask you periodically for your for your opinions as well. So yeah, Di, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Sal. So yeah, let's dive into behavior around the coffee, which is one of the most fun part in this study. So first of all, when we briefly look at the coffee movement, comparing at home versus out of home, having coffee at home is massively dominant. And then when looking at the specific coffee movements on the right side, not surprisingly, working tops the list of the moment, which is followed by studying and then driving. Although the post-pandemic has brought work from home culture to the center of our life, people seem to prioritize having coffee, especially before they start work or study, or even before they start to die. So in which case, drinking coffee becomes habitual behavior. So given that doing work or like studying at home needs extra effort to get into this boost mode compared to doing it at office or like a library in pre-pandemic, coffee movements become way closer to the individual's prep mode for productivity. I think that Oli, you seem to have like a similar research for this, right?
Yeah, so I mean, it comes as no surprise that working sort of that sort of working ethic comes out quite high, because it's that's almost where coffee's got its roots, in that like high caffeine content, high workload, and again we've made products that cater specifically to that need. When you look at sort of Hot Live Java and in the past high voltage. I think what we found actually quite interesting when we look at specifically at ground coffee is actually there's there's evidence to suggest that it's not just that early morning or through the day working occasion. We're actually prevalent throughout the course of the day in sort of our consumers' lives. So one of the most interesting insights I've stumbled across recently is that actually one of our consumption occasions occurs on a Sunday afternoon between 4 till 5 o'clock. And it's not just like these people that are looking for like high intensity, they've got things to do. It's more like they're associating it with relaxation moments as well. And that also sort of lends itself quite interesting to sort of like the rise of decaf, which is something else that we're seeing. Another thing as well is to look at like evenings, so sort of later on in the evening is another sort of key consumption moment, which people might not necessarily always talk about, but it's another area where sort of coffee plays a part in people's lives and plays a role in people's lives.
That's super interesting. I would not expect Sunday afternoon evenings to be so prevalent, because if I have one sip of coffee after 5 p.m, that's it. I'm not sleeping until tomorrow.
It's interesting to see the variety as well between sort of like the different coffee formats. So again, from the research that we looked at, one of the things that we noticed is that ground coffee, like I say, it plays in that relaxation space. Whereas if you look at other things like instant and micro grind, people do associate it more with like functional coffee behavior. Like, I feel tired, I need a coffee, I need it now, I'll have an instant. Whereas ground, obviously, it takes a bit more time to brew, and there's a bit more of a sense of occasion and theatrics, so to speak, that goes with it. So it can play around in different areas.
That's really interesting. That's super interesting.
Yeah. So Dan, what's the motivations driving those coffee moments? Certainly, as you hear, taste seems to be a primary driver for many coffee drinkers. As mentioned previously, now that people have more coffee at home than out of a home, more people like to have a better taste or like experiment with something new, developing their own preference for certain roast blends or like a brewing method based on their flavor preference. So also health benefits are identified as the second strongest driver for having coffee, especially for mental health. People seem to appreciate having coffee when they want to reduce their anxiety or like a stress. And then on top of taste and the health, coffee is also being consumed as aesthetics amongst the younger people. So the moment that they are having coffee as well as making coffee becomes sort of Instagrammable aesthetics and then vibes. So people love to share their moments, especially based on visual platform. Yeah, do you have any thought around this, Oli?
No, I think that all pretty much sort of checks out. I think, yeah, if you look at, because again, sort of taking into context that we're looking at this from from like a total category point of view. I think like, from a worldwide point of view, I think, when you look at, if we were to segment that down by region and by territory, I very much think that this sort of aesthetics point of view is very much being led by the States. And is starting to filter its way through into a UK audience, which is again sort of making it more of a status symbol almost, in terms of people sort of carrying it about in their everyday lives and almost advocating the brand that they enjoy. So yeah, it'd be interesting to look at that sort of side by side comparison from like a UK and a US, and if there's any trends that sort of map it over at a later date.
Awesome,
Yeah.
cool.
So I think we can turn to the next slide, which is, yeah.
This one?
Actually, before that, sorry, Sal.
This one?
Yeah. Thank you. So yeah, when it comes to purchase factors in coffee, price turn out to be the number one, especially given the cost of living crisis and then soaring coffee prices. So many people are not just criticizing overpriced brand coffee, but also showing the willingness to change their go-to coffee by looking for better subscriptions, or if they have a machine at home, as we said previously, by looking for cheaper coffee beans, even from supermarket own brands, which implies brand barriers are getting lowered, but the entry point is getting more diversified with a different buying point. Also, interesting to see growing CX point here, such as customer services and the rewards, which seems to be more appreciated than caffeine content or brand reputation. Oli, do you have any observation actually around this? I know.
Yeah, I was just gonna. Yeah, I was just having a quick look in the chat. Actually, Luke's got a good question just in terms of was roast mentioned. So for those that don't know or might be new to coffee, sort of coffee's roasted on different scales. So if you look at taking our packs into consideration, we have a roast score on the front of pack that sort of indicates the scale at which it was roasted. One of the things that we see personally, I don't think it's necessarily called out in this research, but there's actually quite a lot of consumer confusion around that roast number particularly. So we see quite a lot of our consumers sort of talking about roast in the form of caffeine content. So they might think that the higher the roast score, the higher the caffeine content, which then sort of it sort of influences their purchase that way for those that are wanting that kick. So again, a good example for us is hot lava java, which I believe is at a roast score of 6, and people associate that as a high caffeine content, high roast score sort of product. But we also see quite a lot of confusion, or we see some confusion around decaf. So our decaf has a roast score of 5. So people sort of can sometimes get confused between, well, how can it be decaf if it's got a roast score of 5? So I think it's a challenge that we and other coffee brands sort of might need to face into when we think about like marketing and comms and things going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Next slide, please. I guess after that. Again, same buying factors, but when we break down it by region, each country acts a bit different buying determinants. Although we can see taste is still at the top spot across different countries. Unsurprisingly, the US sees a stick in convenience backed by its solid takeaway coffee culture, whereas the UK's inclinations to price and the coffee bean reflect cost of living mindset that are shaping the perception of a coffee as an affordable treatment amid the crisis. In the meantime, what's interesting to see is a sustainable mindset also strongly identified in Australia and in New Zealand. I think Oli, you might have lots of to say, especially in the UK context in relation to cost of living.
Yeah, very similar sort of again. So like it's interesting to see the sort of convenience sector being called out quite highly, especially when you in the US, especially when you compare it to sort of previous graphs around like community conversations. So my assumption, obviously we don't really explore coffee as a US territory for us, is that ultimately, there's more of a sort of culture in the States of, picking up a coffee on the way into work, whereas in the UK, we don't have that many coffee drive-throughs that we can sort of stop on our commute. So that sort of convenience element is a bit down there. And similarly as well, in terms of like when we look at price, again, that's a challenge that I think, not just us, but a lot of other brands as well, and so this FMCG environment are facing into when we look at, our consumers switching into own label, or are they trading down, or are they also looking at on the flip side, are they willing to pay more for their coffee, or are they wanting to pay more for their coffee because they associate it with a better taste? It's interesting that that's coming out so strongly, and I think it's sort of a reflection of the times as well, where cost of living is such a a prominent conversation with people at the moment.
So yeah, so then who are the audience participating in the coffee conversation? For those not familiar with this audience map here, I'm going to just give you a brief context. This is audience map where we can cluster community segments participating in the conversation based on their shared interests and then online behaviors. So when we map the audience within the US, UK, and Australia and New Zealand, we can spot similar segments across regions despite the cultural differences. Especially sports fans in the red bubble here are strongly engaged in each region's conversation, while younger culturalists in green and then gamers in blue are standing out as the core segments in the conversation. So that's really interesting commonalities between different audience segments. So analyzing the three common audiences through the top motivators also allow us to differentiate and understand each segment better. So if you can turn to the next slide, please. The sports fans uptick in productivity, for instance, in blue, matches to their affinity for coffee as an energy drink. In the meantime, culturalist shows inclinations to aesthetics and the social dimensions of a coffee by expanding coffee as a talking point to discuss different social as well as cultural issues. Whereas young gamers, streamers show more interest in taste and the flavor as they are not huge fan of caffeine actually. So I found it really interesting because those gamers are youngest group amongst the different segments, and then they actually turn out to be really keen to have this decaf and with like a nice flavors. So I'm not sure if you only have like a similar observation around these groups or like any thought around the audience insight.
Yeah, so interestingly, not in coffee. So I think so. One of the things that we're seeing, and this is like a hypothesis on our side, is that from the gaming audience, particularly in our tea side of the business. So we're seeing quite a lot of people or younger gamers as they're sort of starting to mature. They're moving away from high caffeine energy drinks and into sort of slow release, more relaxing, less intense caffeinated options, which is actually bringing them to Yorkshire Tea, our sister tea brand. Now, obviously looking at this as a coffee conversation and bearing in mind it's a worldwide conversation that we're also analysing. I'm sort of I wonder whether it's a case of there is more of a it's a sort of how can I get my words out? It's a difference between the two countries. So obviously there's a greater coffee culture in America, and we're wondering whether that tea culture is being reflected in the form of coffee over in the States, which is sort of lending itself to that affinity with gamers over there.
That's super interesting. It would be a fun hypothesis to try and use Pulsar to prove. I think let's next goal. Let's prove that. Wonderful.
Yeah, this is industry highlight part where we spotlight brand focused conversation. So yeah, let's dive into there. So we isolate the most mentioned brand in the online coffee conversation by applying different color codes to different brand categories here. While the global coffee chains such as Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts are maintaining their top positions, we can also see coffee pot brands like Nespresso and Keurig also rapidly edging out the major coffee chains, which is really interesting because it doesn't only reflect growing demand for atom coffee, it also makes us curious of how the coffee machine brand or like a pot brand built its presence online with a solid fan base, even beyond the cafe. So what we did is take Starbucks and Keurig as an example for store and the pub brand respectively, and then look into how each brand's conversation is driven by different channels. So if we can turn to next slide. Oh, actually, Oli, you might have some thought on this brand breakdown.
Yeah, I think what's interesting from this is just more a case of that, you know, like the biggest players in coffee are the ones that have such a strong out of home presence, and I think it, you know, it just lends itself to that, you know, historic sort of the fact that out of home sort of environments were such a great spot for brands to really showcase themselves. So yeah, I think not much to add from me here that I don't think most people had already recognized, but it's definitely sort of something of interest.
Yeah, sure. So let's look at Starbucks first. So this is a Starbucks content trend split by channel over the last 3 months. Most of the optics here are news driven, like the Starbucks workers strike news. But in terms of channel domination, almost half of the conversation is being driven by digital platforms where Starbucks copycat recipes are massively emerging and then rapidly reproduced from TikTok to Instagram or later from Instagram to Pinterest. And then when we compare this video-driven conversation over Starbucks with the Keurig, if we can turn to next slide, thank you. Keurig conversation is more like bolstered by peer-to-peer consultation across Reddit and Twitter. The first peak here was driven by Airbnb host, who perhaps Keurig as one of the main coffee options for guests, which was well received amongst other Airbnb hosts. And then the other peak was boosted by Starbucks fan, who is looking for lower cost ways to prep morning coffee instead of going to Starbucks as usual. The latter case is really interesting because we can see people moving away from their loyal brand and then even daily habit, and then changing their behavior in response to the cost of living crisis. Also, in this case, the peer-to-peer consultation seems to be highly appreciated. So yeah, that was a really interesting comparison between Starbucks and then Keurig. Hope that helps. And then lastly, I want to take you through one of the interesting moments we found out in the latest coffee trend driven by Gen Z, which was about iced coffee. As we all know, iced coffee is a seasonal drink. As we see here, the online trends around iced coffee is peaking every summer. However, when we look back historic research and the social trends around iced coffee, we can see social trend in the blue shade actually peaking before and after summer, and then such trend following the curve of the previous social trend. And then in terms of the stories, obviously it was the global pandemic that kicked up the such interest in iced coffee. Iced coffee has then become aesthetics since TikTok-driven DIY iced coffee went viral on socials during the first lockdown. Also, this cold drink gains popularity on socials even during the winter, representing cool identities because coffee is usually hot, but iced coffee is associated with sort of a non-normative concept. So we can see many counterculture communities, including LGBTQs, also getting more involved in the iced coffee chatter. So yeah, that was quite an interesting moment looking at iced coffee. But I really wondering if Oli have like a similar observation around this. What do you think, Oli?
Yeah, I think for me, like on this, one of the things that really stands out is just especially when you look at that third peak in the graph, is just how social dominates over search, or not social dominates over search, but social is leading with search. So it's very much a case of these trends are happening, particularly when you look at like the rise of TikTok over the past couple of years, as massive awareness drivers for different products within sort of like that coffee portfolio. So be it Dalgona, iced, whatever. And then people are then flocking to search to try and figure out how to recreate them at home. I think it's quite a valuable insight actually for coffee brands to take away, because I think or just FMCG brands in general actually to take away, in the fact that these trends happen on social and then they end up on search, and you should really try and look to, if you can, optimize your search content to appeal for when that traffic does finally come through.
I think that's so interesting, and this chart shows one of the right on the left here. It shows one of our favorite things to see when we put trend lines of search against social, isn't it, Di? Which is social anticipating search, and search is obviously people, maybe how to iced coffee, where can I buy iced coffee, things like this. So those social moments really indicating an anticipation of an expected behavior could be very, very, very valuable for your brand to be able to follow. Wonderful. I guess, shall we move into the Q&A, Di?
Yeah, please.
Awesome. So we've had loads of Qs come in. I just want to address some of the quickest ones first. So a lot of people have asked, will these slides be shared after the presentation? So the recording of this presentation will be sent out to all attendees. And the slides are actually based off an upcoming report to the State of Coffee 2023 that will be released very soon. So this is kind of a teaser into that. You're getting a very exclusive preview of that today, which we've been obviously excited to share with you, and we're even excited to share further insights in that entire report. So keep an eye on your inboxes for both of that, the recording and the report, which will be released soon. So some more questions that we've had come in. Is it possible to go over what drives engagement with Dunkin' Donuts? No, we don't have that in the presentation right now. We've gone through those slides, but what I will say is that if you've got a particular part of this presentation that really piques your interest, that you'd like to have more information about, do reach out and get in touch with us, because that's something that we'd just love to talk further about this with anyone who's willing to listen to us. So I think that's kind of all of the more technical, my side of questions out of the way. We've got a question here that I'm trying to think which one we go first for. It's really fun. We've got a lot of questions. I want to make sure that we get through them in the most efficient and kind of nicely rounding off way. So this one might be good for Ollie. Do you have any insights on brewing method and level of frustration? Essentially the most joyful or rewarding method to create coffee. I think that's interesting, isn't it? Especially given the prevalence of espresso earlier, which is so hard to make well at home.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. Unfortunately, I don't. I think, like, in the context of this conversation, I think one of the trends that I've seen is actually the espresso side of things. So, but whether or not that is actually the most enjoyable, I'm not sure. But I think when you look at things like platforms such as TikTok, espresso has really sort of grown in popularity on there. And I think it's a lot of it's driven from like the visual nature of it. So that like shot looking up at the espresso as it's being pulled is really sort of garnering quite a viral nature. But I am going to try and dig some out, because I think that's a brilliant question to ask. So thanks.
It was very cool, very interesting, and also I think it's almost like people associate coffee. The more difficult it is to make them, the more rewarding it will be. So maybe that's why those instant coffee moments are for the afternoon, for the evening, as you were talking about earlier. We've also got a question here, so from Anne, who says, on socializing outside of the house, I see some coffee shops opening later, like from till 8 or 9 p.m. In that context, what role has coffee, considering people are often wary of caffeine too close to bedtime, or do you see consumers ordering something else? That's very interesting. I think this question mainly about caffeine and close to bedtime. Maybe an interesting moment to talk about decaf and later in the hours if you know anything about that, Ollie.
Yeah, I mean, speaking from like an out of home perspective, obviously we're not an out of home brand, so it's not really sort of our area of specialty. What I can say though is like we have seen a decaf sort of a growth in our decaf offering, and I think, to be honest with you, people sort of in buying decaf becoming a lot more social, not socially acceptable, because that makes it sound like it wasn't to begin with, but it's almost it's starting to become a bigger part of people's repertoire. So I think it wouldn't surprise me if we're seeing people sort of in an out of home environment buying more decaf, and sort of coffee shops staying open a little bit longer. It'd be interesting to see as well whether the coffee shops are actually expanding their offering to sort of stay open later, especially sort of in light of sort of the challenges that hospitality particularly faced over the past couple of years.
That is very, very interesting. And it is, it's not something I've noticed. It's something really great to keep an eye on, is coffee shops opening later. There's a question here that would be well suited to Di, basically about the parameters in search, asking about individual posts of coffee or plotting individual threads of the coffee subject. Though I was wondering if you could just talk about the kind of scope of this coffee conversation, because I think people really need to know exactly what's being included in this data, because I'm astounded how huge this is.
Yeah, so actually this is based in global data. We gather mentions of a coffee, and then like hashtag coffee, and then like loads of like different types of like coffee mentions, like including espresso, cappuccino, or like a latte. And then like we brought out this data based in the US, UK, and then Canada, also Australia, New Zealand. So based in English-speaking countries, but also which garnering 3 million data, so which is quite big. And then like those sampling posts that we presented here is mainly high engagement post out of the thread, or like out of any like a specific debate around the coffee. So yeah, hope that helped to understand our methodology behind this.
Yeah, it's very huge. Did you say 3 million data points?
Yeah.
3 million, but 3 million social posts, and then all the data points associated with them. So my mind is being blown. I want to make sure that we get through as many of these questions as possible now. I'm really sorry if we don't. We've got loads of questions in the Q&A. We've got loads of questions on the chat as well. So if we don't get to it, please, we will be in touch. So just hold out on that. So speaking on the productivity factor, this is from Ethan. Especially in the gaming audience, is there something specific that drives them towards coffee rather than going for energy drinks? I mean, I think this is similar to what we spoke about earlier. It's about this slow release caffeine. Is that what you're seeing and hypothesizing here, Ollie?
Yeah, it's age ultimately. So I think as people are getting older, they're becoming a bit more health conscious. They're becoming a bit more sort of wary of what they're putting into the body, and I think they see high like energy drinks as high impact, high caffeine, and particularly as they're sort of approaching their sort of mid-30s. These gamers are still wanting that productivity factor that sort of gives them the boost, prevents them from getting tired, but they're wanting a format that's not as strong ultimately. So I think it's mainly to do with age, and they're just moving out of sort of energy drinks particularly, and then moving into these sort of more like lower caffeinated options. Like I say, it's very much for us, we're seeing it in the tea market particularly, but I think since this is a global study, I think it's very much a reflection of sort of cultural differences between, obviously America's got a high coffee culture, whereas we've got more of a tea culture in the UK.
I think it's really interesting. A lot of the questions that we've had come in actually are about caffeine. I think it's something that's on people's minds at the moment. We've got a message from Anne here that says, if Starbucks has a low in caffeine content, but they are ahead in terms of market penetration. Do customers really care about caffeine content? And I think that's referring to a study that was done by Which, the consumer watchdog, that took in the UK specifically an espresso, cappuccino, and I think maybe a latte or a third beverage. It took 3 beverages, and in those, Starbucks had a sixth of the caffeine that was in, I think, Costa, which came out on top, or 9 times as much in Costa, I think, than with Starbucks. So Starbucks was really delivering a low caffeine content in its beans. I think obviously this is more of a we've already kind of gone over the rise of decaf, kind of gaining that more market penetration. But I think it's really interesting to think about why Starbucks obviously knows their caffeine content, and it's interesting to think and hypothesize why they put in a lower caffeine content. And I wonder, I don't know. I don't know. I don't want to speculate or comment on a particular brand, but I just think it's interesting. Does anyone have anything they'd like to say on that, or should I move on to some of the other questions that we've got here before the hour is up? I'll answer just cheaper. Maybe potentially caffeine, lower caffeine is cheaper. And then someone will here suggests Starbucks coffee is higher quality, so less caffeine and is more expensive. So that's very interesting. Maybe it's the blend of Robusta versus Arabica. I can't comment on Starbucks. I'm sure no one else here can comment on what Starbucks is up to, but they're obviously got some kind of grip. It was caffeine per milliliter. Yes, but Luke, the espresso, I think an espresso is a standard unit of milliliters. So I'm obviously out of my depth here on the regulation of the coffee in takeout coffee industry. To move on here, we've got 2 questions, and I'm going to ask Ollie. We've got if you have anything to say on, because I don't think we'll be able to address both. The growth of hot chocolate overlapping in tandem with coffee, mirroring the growth of decaf options. If there's anything on that, or
yeah,
I mean, go for it. If you
I'll touch on them both because I've got them both in front of here.
You've got them in front of you.
For the hot chocolate one, unfortunately, I don't. I know the category team would. I know there are reports out there that are looking at that at the moment. So fortunately, I can't answer that one for you, but I think there is research out there that's sort of publicly available that you can look into. And then the second one from anonymous attendee. Sorry, insight on coffee, mental health, and longevity.
Is it asking about the link between caffeine and mental health, just for others that can't read the Q&A box? Caffeine and mental health, then whether caffeine's good for you, how it's discussed online. It's a very interesting one.
Yeah, I think again, so from a mental health point of view, it's quite interesting because it's not a very the conversation that's happening online around coffee and mental health isn't very scientifically led. So I don't know whether there's any research out there that sort of correlates to or anything like that. That's sort of that wouldn't really be. That's not something that I've seen commented on quite actively. What we do see come out as a sort of a conversation thread in relation to mental health and coffee is, again, similar to that tea conversation. Really, it's more around people, community. And where the role that coffee plays in people's lives as opposed to the functional benefit it has actually on your mental health. So, coming together over a coffee, we saw on some of the data that Di showed with regards to some of those moments, so dating or wherever else, it's all about the community and people coming together, meeting up for a coffee. And I think that's the conversation thread that we're seeing very much outside of functional sort of conversation that relates to mental health and coffee particularly.
Amazing. So that's all of our, I think we've really answered everyone's question. And if anyone has any further questions, I'm afraid we're out of time now, but please do drop us a message and get in touch if you have anything else that you want to note, ask, or say based on what you've seen today. Ollie, thank you so much for your insights. Have been so wonderful, and Di as well for presenting your incredible research. Please, everyone, do keep an eye out in your inboxes and on our website for the full coffee report. Ollie, again, just thank you so much. Where can people find you? How can if people want to engage?
Yes, if you want to obviously give us a follow on Taylor's Coffee and across all social media channels, we're active on there. And then if you want to keep up with some of my ramblings, I'm on LinkedIn as well. Just search for Ollie Ratcliffe and I'm sure I'll pop up.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thanks, Di. Thanks, Ollie. And have
Cheers,
a great
guys.
day.
See you later.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks. Bye.